Hi there. Tell me in the comments which country and city you're from. Dan Wilkins didn't bother meeting my eyes when he said it. Like if he avoided looking at me, the words wouldn't land as hard. We're restructuring. Your position's been eliminated. Effective immediately. That was it. No warning, no lead-up, no attempt to soften the blow. I sat across from him at that long glass conference table in a room so cold it felt intentional, my hands locked together beneath the table so he wouldn't see how badly they were shaking. He was 28, maybe, still young enough to look like he belonged in a college group project instead of running a company, and he couldn't even conduct a meeting without glancing down at a notepad every few seconds. I'd worked at Wilkins Innovations for 3 years. I built the software they now relied on to process millions of dollars in transactions every single week. That platform didn't exist until I wrote it, line by line, late nights and early mornings, and now somehow I was being eliminated. My name is Sarah Lawson. I'm 34 years old, living in Raleigh, North Carolina. After that moment, Dan's voice faded into background noise. My ears rang like I'd just been hit with something loud and sudden. I nodded slowly, pretending to take it in, while inside my chest everything burned. This was a man who had never worked through the night, never sacrificed a weekend, never missed a birthday because production was breaking. I lost all of that building their system. Okay, I said, finally, my voice steady despite the pressure in my throat. Then let's talk severance and bonuses. I assume that's already been discussed. Dan looked up then, clearly thrown, like I'd asked a question that wasn't on his script. Right, so the new management team is reviewing all legacy compensation structures. At this point, no additional severance or performance bonuses are being approved. I blinked once. Excuse me? He shrugged, casual, dismissive. I don't have the authority to approve anything beyond base exit pay. HR can walk you through the details. I leaned forward just enough to make sure he heard me. You're telling me the performance bonuses we contractually agreed on just don't exist anymore? He nodded with a rehearsed, sympathetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. I get that it's frustrating, Sarah, but things are changing. We're moving in a new direction. Buzzwords, empty corporate noise meant to justify bad behavior. I sat there swallowing everything I wanted to say. I'd carried this company on my back while Dan played CEO with his family's money, and now I was being discarded like outdated hardware. Fine, I said. Then I'll speak to legal. He flinched for half a second before recovering. Sure, HR will get you their contact information. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. His smile vanished. I didn't slam the door, but I walked out fast enough that people down the hall turned to look. At my desk, I packed 2 monitors, my laptop, and 3 years of work into a cardboard box. But something inside me had already shifted. I still had my contracts, I still had my emails, and most importantly, I still had the original code. Dan Wilkins had just made the worst mistake of his life. I dropped the box on my kitchen table and opened my laptop before I even took my jacket off. My hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't shock, it was adrenaline. I pulled up my original consulting agreement from when Wilkins Innovations first brought me on. I scrolled past the non-competes and boilerplate language until I found the clause I remembered negotiating with my own lawyer. There it was, clear and unmistakable. All proprietary software developed by the consultant remains the intellectual property of the consultant, unless otherwise licensed in writing. And there was no licensing agreement, not for the framework, not for the transaction engine, not for the internal tools they depended on daily. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Core Platform. Inside were neatly organized components, back-end services, sync modules, APIs, all stamped with dates, versions, and commit histories. I scanned through them quickly, checking timestamps. Everything up through the second funding round was mine. Even after I joined full-time, I never merged the code into their private repository. They used it under an informal understanding that was never finalized. That meant they'd been running my software for 2 years without paying the licensing fees we originally discussed. I searched my inbox next, pulling up email after email. Messages from Dan, from the CTO, from project leads. Keep using Sarah's base system. The loss in platform outperforms alternatives. No need to rebuild. It wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. I created a new folder and began organizing everything: contracts, emails, diagrams, meeting notes from late-night builds. I backed it all up twice. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I just wasn't going to let them steal from me and pretend I didn't matter. The next morning, I called Jane Harris. She answered on the second ring. "Jane Harris speaking?" I explained who I was and how I got her name. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said calmly, "Do you have the original agreement and proof of ownership?" "I do, and I have emails confirming they knew it was mine." "Then you may have a very strong case." We set up a secure file share, and I spent the day uploading everything. While the files transferred, I researched similar cases and reviewed IP law until my eyes burned. I knew they had money. I knew they could drag this out, but they underestimated me the same way they always did. Jane called that evening. "Your clause is solid. Their exposure is significant. We build a timeline and send a demand letter." "Good," I said. "Let's do it." By midnight, I was still typing, documenting every deployment, every revision, every contribution. I wasn't tired. I was focused. The next morning, I sent everything. 2 hours later, Jane called. "This is airtight, Sarah. You have leverage." We sent the letter that afternoon. 3 days later, HR called to confirm receipt. I told them I looked forward to Dan's response. Then the waiting began. I worked freelance jobs to stay afloat, tightened the case with Jane at night, and refused to let them stall me out. A week later, the email arrived from their general counsel, dismissing everything, claiming work for hire, pretending the consulting phase never existed. My chest burned as I read. I called Jane immediately. "They're trying to rewrite history," I said. "I know," she replied. "They're hoping you back down." My jaw tightened. "I won't." She didn't hesitate. "I didn't think you would, but this just got real. They're not bluffing. You need to prepare for a fight." I sat back down at the table and reopened my folders. Fine. They wanted a war. They were going to get one. I pulled up every version of my code that predated my employment start date, labeled, signed, documented. Every line I'd written before I ever stepped into their office as a full-time employee. They could play legal games all day, but I built the system. I owned it, and I was going to prove it. I stayed up until 3 in the morning putting together the last piece of documentation Jane needed. My eyes were burning, wrists sore from typing, but I wasn't quitting. Not now. By sunrise, she filed the lawsuit. Wilkins Innovations was officially being sued for breach of contract and intellectual property theft. From that point on, everything changed. I was no longer just someone they could ignore. I was a legal threat. The next few weeks were brutal. My inbox turned into a war zone. Court notices, procedural motions, endless back and forths between Jane and their legal team. I watched the hours tick by while my bank account bled. Retainers, filing fees, admin costs. Every call with Jane cost money. Every counter motion they filed meant more research, more documentation, more time I didn't have. Freelance work slowed down. I wasn't focused. Some days I could barely look at my laptop without wanting to throw it out the damn window. And sleep? That was a joke. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, running through legal terms I barely understood, wondering how long I could hold out. The tension never let up. I started grinding my teeth in my sleep, lost weight without trying. My phone buzzed constantly. Jane, court clerks, clients, debt collectors. I kept my apartment dark most days just to keep the migraine down. But I kept going. Every spare second I had went into combing through old backups, pulling metadata off original files, tracing timestamps to build the full timeline. I printed out emails and highlighted anything remotely useful. I mapped it all out on my wall like I was hunting a serial killer. Jane warned me early on. They're going to try to exhaust you. They'll question everything, your contract, your timeline, your motives. They'll weaponize every delay to rack up costs and stall the process. That's their entire strategy. And what's ours? Outwork them, outdo them, force their hand.
The next move from Wilkins was predictable. Their lawyers filed a motion claiming my original consulting agreement was superseded by my full-time employment offer. They argued that everything I did once I was on payroll automatically became the company's property under the work-for-hire doctrine. I sat on my couch, reading the motion, fists clenched so tight I thought I'd snap a bone. I called Jane. They're trying to rewrite history. They'll do worse before this is over. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for my name, for the fact that I built something from nothing and they were trying to erase me from it completely, pretend I was just another dev in the background, just some employee with a desk and a salary and no ownership. They didn't get it. I was the system. I had built it, alone in my apartment on cheap coffee and zero sleep. I'd written every line, tested every module, scaled every update, and now some rich kid with a title and a trust fund was trying to put a stamp on it. Hell no. I spent one weekend doing nothing but digging through Slack archives, Google Drive logs, Git history, anything that showed the line between my consulting work and what came after. I found old messages from Dan himself saying things like, "Let's not mess with Sarah's core engine," and "We're lucky she let us keep using it." Every bit of it went into the case file. They wanted to run me out of money, but they underestimated how stubborn I was. I'd been in rooms full of guys who talked over me, managers who took credit for my work, clients who asked if there was a man they could speak to. This was just another version of that same fight, dressed up in legal briefs and invoices, and I wasn't backing down now. I was elbow deep in documentation when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Hello? Hey, it's Kevin. I sat up straight. Kevin from Wilkins? Yeah, sorry to call out of the blue. Look, I don't want this getting back to me, but I figured you should know what's going on over here. I shut my laptop. Go ahead. He let out a low breath. Dan's been walking around acting like you're trying to blackmail the company, saying this whole lawsuit is a scam. He literally told HR that you're just a bitter ex-employee looking for a payday. My stomach turned, but I kept my voice steady. He's really calling it extortion. Yeah, that word exactly. I didn't speak for a second. Kevin filled the silence. But everyone on the dev team knows the truth, Sarah. We were there. We saw what you built. The whole architecture still runs off your original code. Nobody's questioning that. It's just people are scared. Dan's acting paranoid. He's been pulling code reviews from last year, asking managers to rewrite history in case this goes to court. He's covering his ass pretty much. And I hate saying this, but be careful, okay? He's trying to paint you as unstable, vindictive. I stared at the wall, jaw tight. Thanks for telling me. Of course, I don't want you to get blindsided. I hung up and sat in silence, phone still in my hand. That was Dan's play now. Destroy my reputation before this thing ever saw a courtroom. If he poisoned enough minds early on, even if I won legally, I'd still come out looking like a problem. I texted Jane, then opened my laptop again. I didn't have time to fall apart. Later that week, Dan called me directly. I almost didn't pick up, but I wanted to hear whatever was coming next. Hey, Sarah, he said, like we were old friends. Figured it was time we talk face to face. I mean, come on, lawyers? Really? You fired me and stole my work, Dan. What did you expect? A fruit basket? He laughed. Look, I get you're upset, but there's a way to resolve this that doesn't hurt either of us long term. I've got some room to negotiate if you're reasonable. Define reasonable. I've been authorized to offer a settlement. Nothing huge, but it would cover your time. We draft an NDA, shut this thing down clean, no damage to your reputation, no more court fees. We both walk away. You want to pay me to disappear. I want to make it right, he said, softening his voice. We both know this lawsuit won't go anywhere. We can avoid the noise, the costs. Sarah, you're too smart for this. That line hit a nerve. I gripped the phone tighter. You think I'm stupid enough to settle just because you say I'm too smart to keep going? Try again. He sighed. All right, up to you. Then he hung up. I sat back down and opened the project files again. the core data manager, the original routing logic, the patent submission draft I'd never filed but still had in storage. If this went to court, I'd need to prove piece by piece exactly where their system ended and mine began. I spent every night studying line-level commits and API signature changes. Jane and I scheduled late calls going over testimony strategy and legal precedents. It wasn't about being right anymore. It was about not letting them rewrite the story. I was knee-deep in code comparisons when Kevin messaged again. "Shit's hitting the fan over here. They're auditing the entire repo. Tyler's freaking out." I sat up, cracked my knuckles, and called him immediately. He picked up, whispering like he was hiding in a broom closet. "They're doing a full code audit. Dan brought in some outside consultant to go through everything you ever touched, trying to figure out what's yours and what's theirs." What does that tell you? They're scared, Sarah. They know they're exposed. The dev team has been pulled into meetings all week. Everyone's on edge. I looked over at the timeline taped across my wall. They waited too long to panic.
Kevin hesitated. "Also, they're making us flag files where your name's still in the metadata. Dan asked if we could scrub the author tags from the core modules. Tyler said yes. Of course he did. Let them," I said. "I've got clean backups of everything." "You think they're getting ready to settle?" I didn't answer. Later that night, I jumped on a call with Jane and gave her the update. "They're reviewing the repo?" she asked, already typing. "That's big. They're worried about liability. It means they know your codebase is still running live." "Yeah," Kevin said. "They're trying to cover their tracks, probably hoping to avoid depositions." "This could be a turning point," she said. "If they're scrambling to audit now, they might realize settling is safer than losing in court." I muted the call and leaned back in my chair. If this were just about money, that would have been enough. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way Dan had dismissed me, the way Tyler acted like my work belonged to them the second I walked through their doors, like I hadn't built the damn thing from scratch before they even cut me my first check. "Any word from their legal team?" I asked. "Nothing yet, but we keep the pressure on. Don't blink." I didn't sleep that night. My brain wouldn't shut off. I kept going back and forth. Settling would mean financial relief. I could pay off my credit cards, stop living on fumes. But if I took their money now, with no accountability, no admission, no recognition, I'd always regret it. They'd win, and I'd become just another story of a woman who got squeezed out of her own creation. The next day, Kevin called again. "They're screwed," he said, skipping hello. "The consultant they hired told Tyler that rewriting the system without your framework would take over a year minimum." That made me sit up. They said, "What?" "Yeah, a year to rebuild, and that's assuming they keep the current dev team intact, which, not happening. Morale's in the toilet." "What about attribution?" "That's the worst part. Most of the code still has your name in the comments, even in the architecture docs. There's no way to clean it without leaving a trace." I exhaled through my nose. "And Tyler, he's telling people you stole proprietary code, that the company had IP rights all along, and you're trying to cash in on stuff you didn't own?" My jaw clenched. So now I'm the thief. "Half the team isn't buying it. We were there, remember? We watched you build it. Tyler didn't touch the core files for months." I shook my head slowly, looking down at my hands. "They're twisting it because they're cornered. They're desperate," he said. "Don't let up." I wouldn't, not now. I got off the phone, opened my project binder, and started cross-referencing every module Tyler was trying to claim. I wasn't playing defense anymore. If they wanted to drag this into court, I was ready. And if they wanted to settle, they were going to pay the full price for what they tried to steal. 2 days after Kevin's last call, I got an email from Jane with the subject line, "Offer received, urgent." I opened it, hands already tense. Wilkins Innovations was offering a settlement, $50,000, contingent on signing a full NDA and dropping all future claims. I stared at the number like it was a joke, because it was. That wouldn't even cover a year of licensing fees, not to mention the bonuses they skipped, the hours I spent cleaning up their garbage after launch, or the legal bills stacked on my credit card. I called Jane right away. "You saw it?" she said. "Yeah, and I'm insulted." "I get it, but I have to say this. Objectively, it's not a terrible offer. 50 grand, Jane. That system powers half their revenue stream." She sighed.
You and I both know what it's worth, but settlements aren't about fairness, they're about risk and math, and we've been racking up expenses for 6 months. The longer this goes, the thinner your margins. I don't care about margins, I snapped. This isn't just about cash, it's about not letting them win. I understand, she said, calm and even, but I have to lay it out. If we go to trial, we're looking at depositions, discovery, maybe another year. You'll have to testify, they'll drag everything out, question every timestamp, challenge your credibility. I rubbed my forehead. So what? I just take the hush money and vanish? They're scared, Sarah. That's why they made the offer. But yeah, it's a play to make this go away. If you sign that NDA, it's done. No one ever hears about what happened. No court record, no admission of guilt, just a paycheck and silence. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after the call. My chest felt tight. Not from stress, just rage. 50 grand might have helped short term. I could have caught up on bills, maybe even taken a breath. But every dollar of it would have felt dirty, like I'd sold off my name, my work, and my dignity for less than the CTO's annual bonus. They wanted to buy the silence of the woman they tried to erase. They thought I'd take their crumbs and disappear. I called Jane back the next morning. I'm rejecting the offer. She paused. You sure? They want a full NDA and no future claims. That means they're scared of what's in discovery. That means we're close. I'm not backing down now. You know what that means? I do. I hung up the phone and went right back to work. I spent the next week tearing through every line of my code again, printed every updated file, labeled modules by creation date, cross-referenced them with old Git commits, and documented the chain of custody. I started organizing a list of witnesses, anyone who could confirm what I built and when. Kevin agreed to give a written statement if it came to that. So did 2 other former coworkers I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't leave the house, barely slept, ate whatever I could, microwaved between calls. My apartment turned into a war room, docs spread across the table, sticky notes on the wall, legal pads covered in diagrams and flowcharts. If this went to trial, I needed everything clean. No holes, no doubt. I wasn't chasing revenge, I was protecting my name, and I wasn't going to let some smug executive with his daddy's company twist the story just because he had the money to drown people in legal fees. They wanted to end this quietly, but I was just getting started. It was a Wednesday when Jane called. Her voice was sharper than usual, not rushed, just tight. They folded, she said. I sat up straight, phone pressed to my ear. What? They're agreeing to full compensation, back bonuses, 2 years of unpaid licensing, and a future use agreement. Formal, written, signed. I blinked. Wait, they agreed to licensing? They're proposing a 5-year exclusive license. You retain full IP rights, they pay for use, you get to dictate renewals. It's your platform, Sarah. They're just paying to borrow it now. For a second, I didn't say anything. I felt like the air in the room shifted, like the floor finally leveled out after months of walking uphill. Jane continued, There's no NDA this time, no language about you staying silent. They want closure. You get full credit in the agreement. My chest tightened, not from stress this time, but something closer to unbelief. What changed? I asked. I think the internal audit scared them.
I also think their outside counsel finally told them the truth. You were going to win, or worse, they were going to spend another year paying to lose slowly. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the wall of documents, flowcharts, and call notes I hadn't touched in 2 days. It was still there, every detail, but I didn't feel the usual pressure when I looked at it. I felt done. Jane added, Their CEO is calling you directly. He requested to speak with you before we sign. I hesitated. Dan's father? Yeah, name's Michael Wilkins. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Hello? I answered. Ms. Lawson, this is Michael Wilkins. I appreciate you taking my call. His voice was steady, not corporate polished, just tired, like a man trying to fix something too late. I've reviewed everything personally, he said. I owe you an apology. You were right, we mishandled the agreement, and my son, he made a number of poor decisions. I didn't say anything. I want you to know I've seen the code, I've seen the reports. What you built, it's the spine of our company now. You deserve recognition for that, and you'll have it. I cleared my throat.
Then why let it get this far? I trusted the wrong people to handle it, Dan included. That's on me. For a second, I wanted to fire back, but I didn't. I'd already won. He continued, "The licensing agreement has been reviewed and approved. We want to do this right. Going forward, any use of your work will be documented, paid, and under your terms." "And Dan?" I asked. A pause. "He's no longer involved in legal or operational decisions. He's been redirected." I almost laughed. "Thank you for answering my call," he said, "and for holding us accountable." I ended the call and just sat there, staring at my laptop. The fight was over, not because they were kind, because I refused to fold. Jane sent the final agreement later that night. It was clean. Every term we asked for was in writing. Retroactive licensing paid in full, performance bonuses issued within 15 business days, my name attached to the intellectual property, ownership rights preserved. It wasn't just a win, it was the truth, finally, on paper, in writing, undeniable. I leaned over the table, pen in hand, and signed my name at the bottom of the final page. I closed the file, shut my laptop, and exhaled like I hadn't in a year. The money hit my account 2 days later. Every cent, bonuses, licensing fees, and a written agreement that finally acknowledged what I'd built. No spin, no buried clauses, just hard proof that I hadn't imagined all of it, that I wasn't crazy for standing my ground. First thing I did was pay off my legal fees. Every bill, every hour logged. Then I cleared my credit cards and finally canceled the freelance gig I'd been hanging onto for rent. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I was one late payment away from losing everything. But the best part wasn't the money. It was knowing I'd walked through fire and didn't let them break me. 2 weeks later, I joined a small startup in Charlotte, a team of 6, young, scrappy, but sharp. The founder brought me on as lead architect, handed me the stack, and said, "You tell us what you need, and we'll stay out of your way." I laughed out loud during the interview, not out of sarcasm, relief. And true to their word, they listened. They documented everything. My name was on every module I touched. No ambiguity, no ego games, just work and credit where it was due. 3 months in, I'd rebuilt their infrastructure from the ground up, fast, lean, secure. We deployed our first client platform last week, and this time, every licensing detail was spelled out in my contract from day one. No handshakes, no assumptions. I'd learned my lesson. Now, when I look at the work I do, I don't just think about the code. I think about ownership, leverage, protection. I think about what it means to walk away from something when no one else believes you, and still keep walking until they have no choice but to see you. It wasn't easy, none of it was. But I'll say this, they'll never erase my name from my work again. Not ever. If you liked it, please like, comment, and show your appreciation. You will help the channel.